All right, hey everybody, how you doing? So I'm going to go over the true dichotomies that our bodies have, and they try to hold in homeostasis with each other. So remember, so you have true dichotomies, and then each one is trying to be held in an equilibrium somewhere, and we're not sure exactly where that is, but each one has to be also taking into account all the other true dichotomies in our bodies. So if you didn't have one of these and you didn't have to take it into account, then our body wouldn't have a mechanism for that. So there's that. And also that when they're all held in account for with regard to one another, that's when it can change that equilibrium. So we call that homeostasis. When you take all the true dichotomies in our body into account, and they're all held in equilibrium relative to themselves and relative to each other, that's when you have homeostasis. And I would argue that's basically the equivalent to heaven at the societal level. So we will elaborate on the fact that governance at the level of our societies is much like the governance of our internal bodies. They balancing various proteins, hormones, vitamins, sugars, etc. And in this, each one of them has a true dichotomy, and our body has found an equilibrium for it with respect to one another. Each affects the body in its own way, and when they are all considered with respect to each other, they create an equilibrium. A state of homeostasis is created. Homeostasis is the next level of equilibrium, as it takes as many true dichotomies as possible into account regarding the entire body to properly formulate conditions where all true dichotomies simultaneously have an equilibrium. This harmony, this heaven, this is homeostasis. This is harmony. This is heaven. It's homeostasis. So this is how your body operates. And it's also how we should operate at a societal level, is to try to take as many things into account, try to find an equilibrium, which is something that happens over time. And it's a battlefield of ideas. It's the battlefield of different perspectives. And in that pursuit, we will find where we should be with each one of these things. So obviously, none of these apply to the societal level, but I mean, at an individual level, this is how you should be trying to take care of yourself and making sure that your body is in a homeostasis, but also that you're maximally exposed to as much that you can handle of these true dichotomies, so you can better understand them, better equip yourself, etc. And obviously, the most of them I'm talking about external stimuli that you're exposing yourself through exposure therapy, to make sure that you fully understand these dichotomies, so we can utilize them for our ends. So one of the ones I would argue is like heat versus cold. Like, there's not enough people who go out there and expose themselves to hot temperatures, very cold temperatures, and see the full breadth of what these true dichotomies have to offer and what is survivable, etc. So temperature regulation, heat versus cold, is one of these true dichotomies that our bodies take into account. It tries to increase your metabolic rate whenever you need to produce heat, and it tries to prevent heat loss through sweating, or it gives you heat loss through sweating and other things. So both heat production, preventing heat loss as well, and then heat loss in that it makes you cooler and tries to prevent you from getting hot. So we have mechanisms for both. And the equilibrium is somewhere around 98.6 degrees for the average person. And obviously that changes based on age, based on all of these other factors, sex, etc. But that's how it's balanced within our bodies, and it's with respect to all these other aspects. So that's why our temperature goes up when you get sick. It's trying to get rid of that sickness, and in doing so, it can return back to its homeostasis. So your body regulates the temperature based on the context as well. So it takes into context into account, and it does that automatically. Like, you don't even have to think about most of these, if not almost any of these true dichotomies, besides like what the things you need to ingest. And that would be things like fluid imbalance, hydration and dehydration. Hydration and dehydration, sorry. You can have hyperhydration. There's too much water you can drink. There's too little water you can drink, and you get dehydrated, right? So you can have hyperhydration, you can have dehydration, and the equilibrium is your body's going to tell you when you're thirsty. It's going to tell you when you drink too much water. It's gonna tell you these things, and if you keep pushing it, then it will eventually it'll give out, and it won't be good. So when you're trying, you do need to find that equilibrium to maintain proper hydration levels, and your body, unless there's something wrong with it, has a good mechanisms to making sure that it maintains that balance, and it'll tell you when you're thirsty. And obviously you got to plan ahead, and you got to take time into account. True dichotomy of time. But this is how your right hemisphere of your brain thinks. It needs to take all these things into account. Obviously, it doesn't do that on its own. We have a lot of automated mechanisms, and our parasympathetic nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system, all these different things are, just taking care of a lot of this on their own, like your blood glucose levels, hyperglycemia versus hypoglycemia. Both of those extremes are bad. Now, obviously, it just says high or low, but obviously the more you go towards low and the more you go towards high, the more detrimental the effects. And your body tries to maintain an equilibrium, and that equilibrium is around 70 to 110 milligrams per deciliter. So in each one of these categories, you're going to find that there's a particular range, right? It's not like the equilibrium is a single point and it's aiming to maintain that single point. It's that there's a healthy range, and obviously your body's taking so many things into account that you don't even know. And that's probably why it's having some of these problems. So if you experience that you're having super high glycemic index, there's probably something going on with your body, which is what doctors try to figure out, right? But most of the time it's your diet, lack of exercise, or your diet. And we need to increase our fibers, increase our magnesium intake, reduce our sugar intake, and increase our exercise. So that's how you can it fixes most of these problems. And I'm no, dietitian expert or anything like that, but that's what has worked for me, and obviously it won't work for everyone else. But that's what you guys should all be looking for, is like, what works for me, and what are the steps I should take to improve my life, or improve these things, and not get, diabetes or any other aspect that's common in our society right now. And then you have your electrolyte balance, which is sodium versus potassium. So they're both essential for different functions, and they both need to create a homeostasis between them to maintain particular cell function and overall fluid balance. So these work in opposition, but are also working together. So again, that's another true dichotomy within our body, is the level of potassium versus level of sodium. And then you have the pH balance, acidity versus alkalinity. So if you have too much acidity, it's bad. Too much alkalinity, it's bad. Your body maintains a pH of around 7.4, and there's a range for that as well. But that's how that works. And then you have calcium levels, so you can have hypercalcemia, hypocalcemia, oxygen versus carbon dioxide levels. So your body needs both of those things. It needs oxygen, and it needs to get rid of carbon dioxide. So excess oxygen can cause oxidative damage. Insufficient oxygen leads to tissue damage and organ failure. And the equilibrium would be the hemoglobin balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, ensuring efficient cellular respiration. So yeah, again, our body needs both oxygen and carbon dioxide, and it needs to maintain the levels of it to make sure that we don't have insufficient cellular respiration. Okay, so then you have blood pressure, hypertension versus hypotension. Both of those extremes you want to stay away from. Hormone levels, hypersecretion, hyposecretion. So if your body's producing too much of something, you have hyperthyroidism, and if it's not producing enough, then it's hypothyroidism. And there's, remedies for both of those things. But again, this is saying that there's an extreme amount of hormones that your body can release and not enough. So you want to find that equilibrium. And these are all different things that follow that same pattern. So these are, sleepfulness versus wakefulness, formation versus resorption, sympathetic versus parasympathetic, oxidation versus reduction, activation versus suppression, anabolism versus catabolism, appetite regulation. So that's ghrelin, your hormone like ghrelin and insulin, to make sure that you feel hungry or you feel satiated, or leptin and insulin affect your fullness. Thyroid function, hypo versus hyper, like I was saying earlier, regulates your hormones. Blood coagulation versus anticoagulation. Too much and it clogs your entire arteries. Too little and you don't have a way to, just blood just comes out of any wound. So you don't want the extremes of either one of those. Nerve transmission, too much excitation or too much inhibition can be bad. So obviously we know lepers, when they lose their sensibilities in their nerves, then they hurt themselves because they don't have any way to gauge pain anymore. Pain is important for survival across the board. So you need pain, and then you don't want too much of it. So it's like too much excitation and too much nerves going on. That's part of the feeling of anxiety, but it's also the feelings you get when you have like a missing limb, all these different things. It's like you don't want too much nerve transmission and you don't want too little. So we try to balance that. Sometimes we have to use drugs, and that's okay because it helps people get through those situations, but the goal is to eventually get off of them, right? And that's what we should be aiming towards. So you have iron homeostasis. You don't want too much iron, you don't want too little. Body mass regulation, too much fat, too little fat. You don't want either one of those. Cell proliferation, too much cell growth is cancer, too little cell growth, and you can't stay healthy. And then you have blood oxygen transport. So you want your red blood cells to transport oxygen, but not too much or too little. And then filtration and reabsorption of your kidneys, and then gut microbiome balance. So each one of these is on a true dichotomy, and your body's taking it all into account. And there's probably more, there's way more, I'm sure, than just these. These are just some examples so you guys get an understanding of, like, oh my God, our bodies are taking all this into account, not only with respect to each other and themselves, but also where it should be depending on the context that it's in, the environment, all these things. Different genes are activating depending on these things. So this is what we need to do in order to properly understand our society. Like we need to have these there's going to be this many type of things, but these are the things that we need to take into account. We need to take into account true dichotomies rather than these specifics that we're trying to get into. It's like we're trying to correct for when we feel one of these true dichotomies goes towards an extreme. Like when people implement like anti-books, like laws. It's like, yes, those are free flowing and those ideas could be true. So in preventing these ideas from flowing, it could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing because it's like we don't want kids to get access to things too soon. So that's good. We're taking that into account. But at the same time, we should never try to like ban books outright because it could be bad for our society at large. But figuring out what age kids should be exposed to what material is very good. And it's something that is a spectrum of a dichotomy that we need to figure out the right balance of. So that's how we should be looking at it rather than I need to prevent my kid from seeing all material of all kind. It's like, no, what specific material at what age should we be showing kids is like, it should be a progressive thing. Whereas it's not like 18 and you're exposed to all kinds of books and everything under that, you shouldn't be exposed to any books, right? So we're trying to figure that out as a society, and it's kind of a difficult thing, and that's okay because this, dichotomology isn't supposed to teach you what the right answer is. It's supposed to teach you what the wrong answer is. It's like, here's where to stay away from. Do not go towards an extreme, and everything, like we will figure it out along the way, and that's okay. We don't have to be perfect. These true dichotomies in the body illustrate how homeostasis is achieved through a delicate balance of opposing processes. This equilibrium is essential for maintaining health and functionality, reflecting the body's sophisticated mechanisms for regulating its environment internally. By understanding these dichotomies, we can gain access into how the body maintains harmony, what happens when these balances are disrupted, and there are so many aspects that the body is held into account in this homeostasis, but it gives you an idea of the major true dichotomies at play. You can rationalize the extremes of each if you want as well, and I've done that for a few. But in understanding those extremes again, we can understand like in what area we can actually function and which area is likely to be the healthiest for us as a whole. So in understanding the dichotomology, or the true dichotomies at play within us, we can understand how we can apply that to our society or other levels of analysis. So we just need to be careful so as not to think that there is a perfectly right answer. And that's exactly when we start to get to an extreme. That's the crazy part, is like, as soon as you start to say this is the answer, you're wrong, because that's what true dichotomies show you, is that there's no perfect answer. There's only an equilibrium which we can try to get to, and never really attain perfection because of the dynamic nature of reality, and the context, right? But we can always aim for it, and that's what we need to do as a society. We need to not say that this is perfection, is the pursuit of perfection, that equilibrium, that heaven. So we can always pursue it, but it stays ever out of our grasp. And I hope you all learned something from this. The true dichotomies within the body, we went over that, and we went over how we can apply these, not these specific ones, but these concepts to our society. All right, hope you guys learned something. Love you. See you guys next time.